Yo, what's cracking? It's your boy Classic, and I'm here on WSUM 91.7 FM Madison. Before we get started, let me say the opinions expressed on this show do not reflect the views of WSUM, University of Wisconsin Madison, or its Board of Regents. With
Yeah.
that out of the way, I'll let Latoya introduce us.
Yeah, y'all. Hey, it's Latoya Michelle, and as you know, this is Let's Talk About It, a debate style talk show created to deliver meaningful and inclusive conversation on any given topic. And yeah, that's just what we're here to do. So we have guests with us in the studio today to discuss this topic. Do the guests want to introduce themselves?
Hi, my name is Stacy. I'm from LA. Here, I'm friends with Darian and Latoya. So, what's up?
Hello, my name is Christian Alvarado. I'm friends with Darian and Latoya as well from Los Angeles.
Perfect. Yeah. And so today's topic is going to be, should immigrant parents or just parents in general teach their children their native language? That is what we're going to be talking about today. So to start us off from this conversation, Darian, do you want to begin?
Yeah, I will begin. I will have the first conversation today, and I feel like it should be noted that Christian is Hispanic and Stacy is.
I am half Hispanic. I'm half Mexican and half black.
There we go. I am black. My father has some Guatemalan in him at some point somehow.
I'm purely 100% black from Africa. Yeah.
Yeah. So this conversation should be very good. It should be very interesting. We should get into some really good topics. I have a lot of things to share with you all that I got from friends from back home, friends here, and also off of my Instagram. I posted something related to this topic yesterday and allowed some of my followers to contribute to today's show. So that should be very interesting, and we're going to get right into that. So like Latoya introduced us earlier, the topic for today is, should parents teach their children their native tongue? And with an emphasis on immigrants that have come to America, and now that they are raising their children or maybe even their grandchildren, and they have to make that decision of whether they're going to solely teach their children or grandchildren English, or if they're going to incorporate their native tongue and English in the household, or if they're only going to speak their native tongue. So starting off with me, my opinion and my position on this topic is that I feel that it would be very beneficial for for the children and the grandchildren to learn their native language. I think it will be a very beneficial thing for them. I think it will influence their character development growing up. I feel like it has a very large impact on their identity as they develop into their adulthood. And I feel that it has a positive influence on not only them but those around them. But at the same time, I feel that there is a very prominent expectation in America, and especially in the business world, and as you develop into secondary education and other roles, that you must have a very proficient level of English to survive in some of these fields and the majority of these fields. So my position on it is just that, I feel that it is very beneficial. I feel like it is a crucial part of their identity and their development, but at the same time, English must be of equal importance, and in some cases, maybe even more, as we'll dive into as we get into some of these questions and some of the conversations. And I was reading some articles on this topic. I read a lot of articles, actually. I think I looked through about 6 or 7, and most of them had overlapping information. But I saw that, like I said earlier, these sources were saying that mastery of English language is regarded as necessary to thrive and obtain professional status in America. And these immigrant parents, they want their children to learn their native tongue so that they can communicate with their family, embrace their heritage, and hopefully be able to go to visit their home country one day and have that language to really be and embrace their culture. So one of the first questions I want to propose to you all is, what do you think a parent should do if they want to teach their child their native tongue, but the child does not want to speak the native tongue in the house? So in this situation, the child is learning English and learning their native tongue. How do you go about doing that if the child is approaching the parents and saying, I don't want to speak my native tongue in the house. I want to develop my English only. How do you think you would go about addressing that?
Well, I know, like, for me, listening to, like, how my dad grew up, He is from Mexico. His parents are from Mexico. They were only allowed to speak Spanish in the household. If they were to speak English in the household, they would not get a response from their parents. And I feel like that's a lot of like there's like a lot of similarities with like different families, how that is and how they are brought up. Like you have to speak the native language in the house. And
Yeah.
I feel like I encourage that type of behavior because when you do get older, you want to be able to speak Spanish, like speak whatever language like fluently and to comprehend it to like its fullest level.
Right.
And I feel like when people do become older, they have those regrets. Because I know my dad has those regrets because he struggled with like speaking Spanish at home, you know?
Right.
Personally, so your question was that like if the kid doesn't want to learn the native language, well, personally, I believe that. Well, my mother is Mexican, but she was born here, but my grandparents weren't. However, my dad, he's Guatemalan and he's an immigrant. And growing up, it wasn't really a choice for me to decide whether I wanted to learn English or Spanish because it was like pretty much required for me to communicate with my father, or else I just wouldn't talk to him if I didn't learn Spanish. But I personally feel like the kid should want to learn about his language or his or her language. At the end of the day, you know, maybe the kid finds themselves struggling in school because they're getting both languages mixed up.
Right.
Trying to learn both at the same time, it's not as easy, but yeah, that's just my input for right now.
Yeah, I would kind of piggybacking off what Chris was saying. As a parent, if my child came to me saying, and there was some other language in the household saying, like, I don't want to learn that one, I just want to solely focus on English, I think my first response would be to ask them why. Because there has to be a reason. Is it because I'm struggling in school and I can't really focus on which language, like which one to actually like speak? Like I just mix them up all the time. Is it that people are bullying me for certain reasons because of this? Is it I'm ashamed? Like finding out the root cause of why they don't. Because if it's a cause that's not something like ashamed of their culture, then I think maybe that should be taken in consideration if they really truly are like, I just don't feel comfortable wanting to learn this language for whatever reason. But if it's something like I just am ashamed because people make fun of me, that's something that needs to be addressed with the
Right.
child, and they need to talk like, listen, be proud of who you are and be proud of what that represents. So I think that starts with a conversation more than anything, talking to your child, talking to them about their reason for not wanting to learn the language.
Yeah, and just kind of understanding their experience growing up in America as well, compared to the parents' lifestyle growing up or moving to America and now having to raise a child in a country that is, in many ways, very aggressive and very brutal in a lot of aspects that doesn't really allow somebody to slack off or allow somebody to not know the language in certain situations, because that could be the difference between getting a job or not, or having food on the table or not, or being profiled or not. And reading these articles, a lot of them were talking about how immigrants and other people, no matter what the language, they don't want to speak, or that they avoid speaking their language in public places because they do not want to get racially profiled, racially profiled, culturally profiled. They don't want people to think that they don't know the English language when they do. So they'd rather just speak English instead of having that burden and having that weight on their shoulders, that when they're walking around, people are looking at them and thinking of them as lesser just because they're speaking a different language from them. And I really did appreciate all your guys' contributions to that question. And another question that I had is, what do you think about the children who are raised speaking both of these languages when the parents only speak one? So you're in a household where maybe the parent is only speaking their native tongue, but the child is in school, in American schooling systems, and they're learning English, and at home they're also learning their native tongue. You know, how does that? How do you think that feels, or how that operates in a household where there's a situation like that, where there's almost a disconnect or a wall in between these two generations just because of the language barrier that's now created with this child that knows two languages?
I think sometimes that can be hard. I know from experience, like my dad being a school teacher, one time he was required to call home, and he's a high school teacher, to call home for some students' parents because like they weren't showing up to class for an extended period of time. And when he called home, the parent answered they only spoke Spanish. My dad didn't speak Spanish at all, and so then the student got on the phone, and his student who wasn't coming to class, he was like telling him like tell your parents this, and having that language barrier can be hard on a student because one, now I can see how that can be a comfortable situation having to explain to your parents, oh, my teacher's calling saying like I'm not showing up to class. And then so I feel like that can be uncomfortable for them. And then also maybe that might add like some embarrassment or some because they feeling like excluded or feeling like they're different. Like, oh, he can just call and talk to everyone else's parents, but for me, I have to be like this interpreter and I have to be this
Right.
translator. So I feel like it can cause uneasy feelings. But at the same time, I haven't known it from personal experiences and not my personal, but from people I know to actually affect like the way they look at their parents like that or grow up. Like I know like one of my best friends from home, her parents primarily only speak Spanish, and for her like that's no problem. Like she'll just talk to her parents in Spanish, talk to us in English. She said like she only knew Spanish until she got to school. Then when she went to school, she was in like ESL classes, and she's literally better than me in every way, like in English. Like so, it didn't really cause a problem for her one picking up English because she still learned English in school in like kindergarten, so still young enough, and also like she doesn't see her parents as anything different.
Right. Um, no, yeah, I can personally relate to that. So like when I would go with my grandparents to like doctor appointments or with my father or like anywhere, I would have to interpret
Mhm.
um English to Spanish to them. And I feel like at the same time when kids have to do this to in a certain aspect, I feel like I had to mature much faster than other kids because I had to, I had to understand like what the doctor was prescribing to my grandparents. I had to let my dad know important information. Sometimes I would like help him do his taxes because he couldn't understand what like it was saying. But then going back to like going to school English and household Spanish, that was the exact same thing for me. Although my mother did know English, it was kind of a rule of to speak Spanish at home so no one would feel excluded from not knowing what was being said or what was going on. And personally, that affected me a lot up until like the second or third grade. I had to like stay after school for an extra hour or two to take more help for English because my English wasn't that good and my grammar because I was just accustomed to speaking in Spanish literally the rest of the day aside from school. And it was kind of tough in the beginning because I would get picked on and I would have this accent, and sometimes when I talk to Darian, like there's some words I pronounce kind of weirdly because of that Spanish accent. But as a little kid it was kind of like hard to embrace, but now that I'm older I'm grateful that that I know both of the languages. But definitely there are hardships that come with trying to learn both languages at the same time.
Yeah, and just thinking about high school, I heard both of you guys talking about your experiences in school and stories from that, and it's interesting because from one aspect, like Christian was just saying, or Chris was just saying, it's almost like another layer or another level of interpretation or translating that he has to do. It makes him have more responsibility in the household because he is one of the people that can speak English and can handle all of these conversations that his parents or grandparents may not be able to have. But when you go to high school and you look at it from a academic level, it's very applauded to have multiple languages under your belt if you're graduating with a bilingual certificate. And if you take the AP classes and you can pass the test, then you can put that on your resume as you can go to college and pass into the late, whatever language it is, you can pass into the late higher level classes. And that's looked upon very highly. But there's also this other layer where it's like, this is my culture and this is my heritage and this is something that I have to do growing up in America and growing up around people that only expect me to speak English when I'm out in public or when I'm at a professional setting, when in reality I go home and I'm speaking Spanish for the rest of the day, or with my parents or with my family or with my other friends that I'm not with all day. And just bouncing off of that, I wanted to ask Stacy if she could share her experience growing up in the household, because you don't speak Spanish.
Yeah, I don't speak Spanish fluently, but I grew up in a household that was strictly Spanish. Sorry. But because I am half Black, all of my relatives only spoke English to me because they didn't want me to learn the language, develop an accent, and to be mocked and, have to go through what they went through. And I absolutely hate it. Like, I wish I learned the language. I wish I was fluent in Spanish. Like, I'm trying to learn it now. And it's hard. It's really hard because I do feel disconnected from my culture.
Right. And just bouncing off of that, like I was saying earlier at the beginning of the show, I reached out to one of my friends back home. His name is Ethelbert Annam, and he's going to UC Berkeley right now. He's studying engineering. And I asked him about his experience. We went to high school together. He's a very good friend of mine, and he is Nigerian. And I asked him if he could share his experience growing up in the household and having that, and what his experiences was with a native language. And I'll just read what he sent to me, just directly what he said to me. So this is words from Ethelbert Annam. He says, "My parents were very strict on speaking Igbo to us at home. They only spoke to us in Igbo, so we were forced to only reply in Igbo. This did lead to me having a small accent that I used to be embarrassed of at school. I felt that I was different because I said words differently from other people. Me and my siblings were very fluent in the language, so we were able to communicate with one another in a language that other people did not understand. This was something we appreciated because we had our own unique code language. We also appreciated the fact that we were not looked down upon by Igbo-speaking adults for not understanding our native language. Now that I've grown up, I appreciate my parents even more because a lot of my peers were not taught the language by their parents. They're sadly just now beginning to learn their language in young adulthood." And just bouncing off of what we have been saying here in the studio and what Ethelbert was saying when that he sent to me, it's just so many layers to this conversation about the effects, not only if, but when and how that's going to be incorporated into somebody's identity, or how that's going to affect them and their development in school and growing up and in developing their characteristics and their personality. And I feel like it is a very beneficial thing, and I feel like it does a lot to build someone's character, and it does a lot to really give them maybe a one-up, or give them something to be happy about or be proud about when they're thinking about their heritage and their culture, when they know other people that cannot do it. And like you're just saying, you're one of those, Stacy is one of those people that she's just now trying to learn her native language in early adulthood, while for somebody that learned it from childhood, in the beginning, they might not have liked it, or it may have been a little bit rougher, but now they appreciate it. And now these people that had that, for lack of better words, that ease of just speaking English in the household or growing up with English, now we're kind of backtracking. And this is when you're like, I really do want to learn this language, and I want to be able to communicate with this other side of my family and understand the heritage behind the language itself. So I think I've done a pretty good amount of time. Let me see if I can finish this off with one more question. No, I think I'm good. I think I'm good. So we'll have a short break right now, and then we'll get back into another component of the conversation in a little bit. So stay tuned and don't go anywhere. Thanks.
24/7, girl, you dip on my breath. And I know you want me to go down on my knees. Heard you can't eat, I heard you know be sleep. And I want you to know that, girl, it's not that deep. So what's up? You alright? I pull up, I'm outside. What's up? You alright? Pull up, girl, I'm outside. A million ways, I swear I prove you wrong. You wrong. 'Cause I love you for life, you know, go understand. I'm smarting if I bust a million for you. Girl, I don't even mind, I know good thing can pass. So what's up? You alright? I pull up, outside. What's up? You alright? Pull up. Girl, I'm outside. 24/7, you've been sitting on my mind. If you I think about like all day. Never did that thing that I be standing there today, cause I came a long way from God. Love and the vibe is between me and you, baby, don't go telling nobody. My girl, you're shining just like my wrist, baby, welcome to this side. 24/7, you've been sitting on my mind. If you I think about like all day. Never did that thing that I be standing there today, cause I came a long way from God. Love and the vibe is between me and you, baby, don't go telling nobody. My girl, you're shining just like my wrist, baby, welcome to this side. So what's up? You alright? I pull up, I'm outside. What's up? You alright? I pull up, girl, I'm outside.
Africa Giant. This is your 2000 best. Mapamina.
Tune in to 91.7 FM every Friday from 3 to 5 p.m. to hear a variety of local, regional, and national touring artists perform live at WSUM.
Following each performance, we sit down with the musician to talk about their latest projects, stories from tour, and much more.
Past guests have included rapper Broadway Muse, indie rocker Steph Chura, and singer-songwriter Gus Dapperton.
If you are a musician looking to connect with our audience, contact WSUM's music director by emailing music@wsum.wisc.edu.
Highlighting up-and-coming musicians from Madison beyond, this is WSUM 91.7 FM and WSUM.org.
What does freedom of speech mean to me?
It means I can build a mosque and worship there.
It means I don't have to stay
silent when I'm wronged.
It means I can fight for the right to marry.
It means I can write about how I feel about my elected officials, good or bad.
It means I can spread the gospel of Christ.
It means my voice.
My voice?
My voice.
My voice.
My voice.
My
right
voice.
It means my voice
is free.
This message is brought to you by the NAB Education Foundation, the Broadcast Education Association, McCormick Foundation, and this station.
Hey y'all, so we're back. Once again, the topic was, should parents teach their children their native tongue? There are two guests with us in the studio. Just if you guys can introduce yourselves one more time before we start again.
Hi, my name is Stacy.
Hello, my name is Christian Alvarado.
Perfect. And yes, so now Darion led the last section of this conversation. Now I guess I'm going to lead this one. And so I guess I'll start with my position on this whole topic in general. And that is that although I do think it is great to teach someone your native language, because there is so much culture and identity within that and learning that language, I do not think knowing your native tongue makes you any less of a member of that culture. And that is and I don't think it makes you any less of a parent if you choose not to teach your children your native tongue. So that's my official position on it. I know that this is something I've been thinking about this topic for a while now, over like a year and a half, when my father came home after one day. Being a teacher, you actually get a lot of experiences with different things. So he came home one day and was telling us, like, one of his coworkers was talking during one of their weekly meetings, and somehow they just started bringing up like teaching your kids their languages. And he was like, yeah, I purposely chose not to teach my children Spanish. And everyone in his department was like, wait, what? Like, why would you do that? And he was like, yeah, growing up, I was bullied really for having an accent, and I didn't want my children to go through that same thing. So I just never taught them. I made an active decision to not teach them. And a lot of people in his department were actually like kind of making fun of his decision to not teach his children Spanish for that reason. But I think it's very important to teach your children. I think it's very important to respect his decision to not teach his children, because we have to understand the background situation. Like, obviously, I don't think this was an easy decision for him to make. I think it was one of every parent's natural instinct is to protect their children. And I think that is what really went into this decision to not teach their his children Spanish. So I was wondering, my first question to all of you is, do you think it makes someone less a part of their culture or less a member of that culture if they don't speak the native tongue?
Absolutely not. Listen, I 100% identify as Mexican and I am absolutely in love with my culture. I incorporate I'm a part of it. I try to be as active as I can. And I do get like a lot of backlash and a lot of people that say that I am not Mexican simply because I don't speak Spanish fluently. And that wasn't something I could control. Like my parents, they were not like they didn't want me to learn Spanish, my father specifically, because when he came to this country, he was not his English was not good. He got teased a lot, he struggled with it a lot. And his accent now, it's like basically completely gone. It comes out every now and then, but he worked on his English so much that he wanted to eliminate his accent in every way possible. And that like really impacted me because I do, every time somebody brings it up, like, oh, like you are Mexican, because I do favor more on the black side. So people don't write off, they're like, oh yeah, you're Mexican too. I feel like that part is kind of erased because I don't have an accent. I wish I wish I had an accent, like just to feel more connected, more like, I don't know, just feel more connected with my culture. And it's really frustrating because a lot of people don't see that. They don't recognize it. They kind of just like push me off to the side, like, okay, like you're whatever. You're not like us, basically. So it took a lot to try to like feel comfortable and like not care what other people were saying because, you know, I am what I am and I know what that is. Like I am Mexican, I'm American. That's it.
So personally, so I do know my native language, which is Spanish. And I don't think that if someone doesn't know their native language, they're not necessarily part of their culture, because you know it's in their blood. Who are you to say just because they don't know the language they're not part of that nationality or culture? Because culture is much more than just a language. It's about traditions and actions. However, growing up and knowing Spanish, it was much easier for me to embrace myself in the culture. You know, I feel like Spanish isn't like knowing your native language isn't necessary, but I feel like it helps a lot with understanding of the historical background and just easier to communicate with that community that you have. And an example of that, just because you don't know the language or language doesn't really correlate with culture, is that my dad is Guatemalan. However, growing up, I grew up in a more of a Mexican household. And despite knowing Spanish, which is the prime language in Guatemala, I still felt myself distanced from the Guatemalan culture. And that just comes to show, even though I did know Spanish, you know, I still felt that I wasn't necessarily Guatemalan because I just didn't know the traditions. So culture is just much more than language. However, as I stated before, it is an easy gateway to just embrace yourself in it.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that as well. And I feel that although it is not it is not a factor that decides whether you're a part of a culture or not. But I feel like just like you were saying, it could be a little easier or a little more it could just be easier to connect with that culture if you do know the native language. And even just thinking about just like Christian, in your experience growing up in a household with two different cultures, you have Guatemala and you have Mexico, and you have these two different cultures that may be similar in some ways, but like you said, cultures there's so much more than just the language. There's so many other things that come into effect when you're talking about something like this. So you can't even identify language just based on the culture because you have so many different types of the same language. It's crazy. Just thinking about, I took French in high school, and just thinking about French, there's a totally different version of French in Canada than it is in France. And just like there's a totally different version of French in Africa from both of those different places. And that goes with everywhere. in the world in these different languages, and that just goes to show that the culture is different in all these different places too. You can't expect to have the same result in different locations, different backgrounds, different environments with a different set of people who have had different upbringings. And when you put them all in a place like America and expect them to just assimilate and go for English 100%, like that's just not, I don't know. I feel like the native language is something that could be very beneficial, but at the end of the day, it is not the leading factor to decide whether or not you're in a particular group.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, guys. So my next question has to do with the second part that I brought up, which are the parents. So do you think it reflects negatively on parents who decide not to teach their children the native language? What are your thoughts on that? Like on the parent side, not the children.
I feel like it kind of robs them of something, like a learning experience, because personally, because I wasn't raised with like people teaching me Spanish and like Spanish being like a main factor, I feel like a little bit lost at conversation. Well, definitely lost at conversation. I feel like parents are responsible for their child's upbringing, like of course, and being like just taking that opportunity away from your child, like stripping that away from them, it's absolutely like horrible. Like you can't take that back. So like even communicating with my grandmother is hard. And so I don't have as strong as a bond as I should because there's a language barrier. Like language it's crucial, you know? So it's definitely like the parent's responsibility to make sure that their child is able to like communicate with people and to communicate with people that they love, especially.
So if they don't teach their children, do you think that's wrong?
I think so. I definitely think so.
If a parent decides not to teach their children the native language, I agree with Stacy. It does rob the kid from, well, it inhibits them to really be able to unlock a community that is out there for them. Because, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. So there's this community, there's its own Spanish community, and I feel if the kid doesn't know Spanish, it's just they're not able to relate or be able to easily embrace themselves within that group of people. And at the same time, I feel that with knowing your native language, it comes with stories, it comes with history, not only from your family but from the nation itself. Because I know personally, I know stories from my grandfather. However, those stories aren't the same if I tell them in English as they are in Spanish. But I wouldn't say it's wrong for the parent not to teach their kids Spanish, but it definitely does. The kid does lose a large or like a portion of what, like, it just inhibits them from unlocking their full potential and embracing and what they in their identity. So yeah.
Nah, I feel that makes sense. When you sound like your full potential, I thought like a
Pandora's box.
Yeah.
It's not like a superpower. That's all.
Yeah. It is kind of a superpower though. Like low-key though.
Yeah. And when I'm thinking about it, it's I feel like it all just has to do with the experience of the parent at hand. If they had a negative experience coming to America and speaking their native tongue, like the story LaToya shared, they might shy away from teaching their child that or grandchildren that because they do not want them to experience the suffering and the pain that they had to go through just because they spoke a different language. If they see that is something that could potentially harm their child or that could potentially make things a lot harder for them as they grow up and as they try to make a name for themselves, then they might just allow them to make that decision down the line and not force it upon them or not teach them at a young age because they, in their mind, they are preventing them from going through a negative experience that they encountered as an adult or coming to America or even as a child. And they are trying to prevent that from happening for the next generation And in some cases, they might not see it as necessary because some parents do want their children to go home to their country and interact with their family. And I think, Chris, you just went home. You just went to Guatemala for like the first time.
Yeah, my first time, and I'm 19 years old.
Right. This past summer,
Yeah,
a few months
this
ago.
summer.
But some parents don't want that at all. Some parents don't want their children to be associated with their culture at all, and they just want them to be American. They don't want them to have that other side of them. And another person that I talked to yesterday, I'm not going to give you their name, but they were saying that they wish that they grew up in a household where their parents spoke the language, and they wish that they had that opportunity to learn the language. And they do wish to be a part of that culture and hopefully one day go visit, but they were never invited by their parents to be a part of that culture. Their parents never wanted them to be a part of that culture. They never wanted to speak the language around them. They never wanted them to gain the interest to even want to do anything. So I feel like it just all goes down to personal preference and your experiences that you had with the language and the barriers you faced, whether that was a positive experience or a negative experience. But overall, I feel that it's not wrong for a parent to not teach their child the native language, but it could definitely be a good opportunity and a good thing. But at the same time, it might hold negative effects. But I feel that especially now in the state of America, in the state of our union, going forward, I feel that people are the next generation and these newer generations are a lot more inclusive. And I was saying that last week for our show as well. And they will be a lot more open to appreciate people with diversity and these different cultures and these different languages that they can bring to the table when it comes to their professional careers.
Thank you. Yes. And for my last question, so we already discussed the effect on children, then we discussed parents' responsibility. Now I want to talk about us in general and us as people. So for kind of a more fun question, if you were to get into cultural relationship with someone and they spoke a different language, it's particularly you, Chris, because you do speak Spanish, and let's say they speak French or something, and now you're faced with the decision, okay, are we going to try to teach our kid French and Spanish and English? Are we going to choose one of those two languages? What are we going to do? And then for the rest of us, who maybe we don't speak another language yet, are we going to try to have our kid learn that other language, even if it means they can't communicate with us with it? Because that is something, like if we do have our significant other teach our children that is kind of a way that you're no longer connected to your child. So yeah, how do you guys feel?
Well, to be honest, I've actually thought about this a lot. Potentially in the future when I have my own kids. Because personally, I just find the idea of mixing cultures pretty cool. So hopefully my spouse will not be Hispanic, but if she is, it's cool. All women are beautiful. But
Yes.
Going back to the topic, personally, I think I would try my best to include both cultures, and show my child both, where they came from, because it's not right to choose maybe one culture over the other, because they're both as equally important, because they're just both as equally part of the kid. And I actually knew someone from school that knew 3 languages, which was English, and then it was Spanish, and then I think the other one was, either Tagalog.
Tagalog, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought it was pretty cool because now they have access to 3 different communities, with 3 different languages. But then again, as we were saying previously, it's already hard enough trying to learn 2 languages. Now imagine a kid trying to balance 3 languages growing up. But that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah. I feel that that was one of my questions that I was going to ask when I was talking too. And just thinking about, what do you do in this situation where you have somebody that speaks, maybe both of them speak English, but one of them speaks their native tongue, which might be an African language, and one of them speaks their tongue, which might be a South American language. Like, what do you do? How do you go about doing that? Do you sit them down and say, hey, you're going to learn 3 languages growing up, and you're gonna be dope, or you're gonna be like, hey, we're just gonna get you this English for right now, and we're gonna see how it goes. But I don't know. I don't know if I would mind that if I had a spouse that spoke a native tongue. I don't think I would mind if our child would speak that language. I feel like that would be pretty cool, and that would be another connection that our child would have to the other side of the family, and that would be pretty cool. Yes, that's cool. That's all I got.
Yeah, so same for me. I want my child, well, regardless, my child is learning Spanish because I'm learning Spanish and I'm going to master it. So my child, whatever my significant other, if they speak another language, they are definitely going to learn that language. I want them to just be able to immerse themselves and like just broaden their horizons as much as possible. Because I feel like it's a connection. Even if I don't understand, I'll learn the language, shoot. But it's great. I think it's a great thing to just allow your child to, especially in like those first 5 years. That's like the most crucial time for child development. So just building on that, I think would be great.
Yep. On that note, we're going to take another short break, and then we're going to finish off. We're going to allow Stacy and Chris to bring up any more topics or questions that they might want to go through, and we'll do that right after the break. So stay tuned.
Tú me tienes loco, loco contigo. Yo trato y trato, pero baby no te olvido. Tú me tienes loco, loco contigo. Yo trato y trato, pero baby aquí yo sigo. Okay. Mami, tú eres una champion, rampa, pa, pam, pam, con un booty fuera del hogar. Una cintura chiquita, mata la cancha, tú estás fuera lo normal. Tú lo bates como la vena de abuela. Hay muchas mujeres, pero tú ganas por vela. Enseñando mucho y todo por fuera. Tu diseñado no quiso gastar en la tela. Oh, mama, tú eres la fama. Estás conmigo y te va mañana. Cuando lo mueves, todo me sana. Eres mi antídoto cuando tengo ganas. Oh, mama, tú eres la fama. Estás conmigo y te va mañana. Cuando lo mueves, todo me sana. Eres mi antídoto cuando tengo ganas. Tú me tienes loco, loco contigo. Yo trato y trato, pero baby no te olvido. Tú me tienes loco, loco contigo. Yo trato y trato, pero baby aquí yo sigo.
Oh, I make it hot, your body on top, kiss me up, wanna lip lock, party won't stop, and it's 4 o'clock, iced out watch, I can get you one, yeah, tell your best friend, she get one, girls wanna have fun, I'm who they run to, move, your body know you want to, 1, 2, baby I want you, cute face, little waist, move to the base, that ass need a seat, you can sit on me, that's my old girl, yeah, she an antique, you got that new body, yeah, you an art piece. You like salsa? Yeah, I'm saucy. Caliente, muy caliente, 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 hey. Caliente,
tú me tienes loco, loco contigo. Yo trato y trato, pero baby no te olvido. Tú me tienes loco, loco contigo. Yo trato y trato, pero baby aquí yo sigo. Tú pides lo que quieras, lo que quieras, lo que quieras. Que yo lo hago a tu manera, a tu manera, a tu manera. Dale, mueve la cadera como lo hacía Selena. Tú no tienes ataduras, vamos, romper la cadena. Dear Snake, Chip Man. Latino Gang, Tiger.
Yo, what's cracking? It's your boy Classic, and we are back on WSUM 91.7 FM Madison. As we get into our last conversation for this show, just let me say again, the opinions expressed on this show do not reflect the views of WSUM, University of Wisconsin-Madison, or its Board of Regents. And the topic that we're just now finishing up talking about is whether parents should teach their children their native language. And I have gave my opinion. Latoya has shared hers, and now we have our two guests, Stacy and Chris, and they're going to be asking us any questions or just furthering off, going off the conversation for the next few minutes before we close.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that with like knowing your native language. So something I learned in my Chicano class was that there's just like, as Darian said, like as the state of our union progresses, we accept where the newer generations are accepting more diversity, and with like personally with knowing Spanish and English, I've been also been able to be part of a community that speaks Spanglish, which is a mixture of both Spanish and English, which is unique because Spanglish is just a unique type of language only seen within the newer generations from Spanish descending immigrants. So not only knowing your native language gives you access to being able to embrace your culture in a different way, but also it allows you to unlock different communities and maybe being able to find this balance between both languages that you know, which is pretty cool, I think, personally.
Yeah, and going off of that, Christian is actually my roommate. Everybody in this room right now is in the same scholarship program. We're all Posse scholars.
Woo woo.
So, and we're all from Los Angeles, and we're all sophomores.
Cool.
I guess, am I the youngest one in the room?
You are the youngest. I'm the oldest.
Cool. But yeah, I do live with Chris, and it is interesting hearing him communicate with his mother, because he'll answer the phone, and over the course of 5 minutes, there will just be, it's really interesting, because it will literally be one word out of the whole sentence that's a different language, and then they're just going back and forth, and I'm just sitting there like, that's dope. That's really cool. So I can attest that is in fact its own very interesting and new type of language or experience that the newer generations have available to them. So yeah. Anybody else have anything they want to bring up?
No.
All right. Well, I'm asking another question. I had a lot of questions. We already talked about that. Do you think that these languages should be taught in schools?
There are already programs in the schools. I know last year, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine. You're good.
Last year in my FIG, we went on a field trip to like a school in Madison, and they have dual language programs. So half of the day they would teach the kids in Spanish, half the day, and the rest of the day they would teach the kids in English. And it was like, so like, you would go to your history class, and your history class would be in Spanish, or in your math class would be in English, or vice versa.
Right.
And they said that in order to get into the program, first of all, they take kids who their native, like their home language is something else,
right,
not other than English, and then they bring in kids who don't have a second language, so that way they're able to. It was like a trade-off where kids who are learning English from their teacher as well as their classmates who only speak English.
Oh, right.
And then kids.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So
right.
it was like really interesting, like seeing how the kids engage with each other, because there was just so many different conversations happening, and it was very interactive, and like the kids, they're able to understand things a lot better because they're in an environment where they're comfortable speaking whatever language they feel comfortable speaking.
Yeah.
And it's great. And I feel like a lot more schools should encourage it, and not with just Spanish, like with other languages.
I was going to ask you if it was...
like especially because like depending on like the region,
right?
Because like back home where I'm from Carson, and we have a lot of like our population of Filipinos, it's the largest outside of the Philippines. So I feel like having dual language programs in Spanish and English and Tagalog and English, it's like going to be really beneficial for those kids, and it'll make them feel more comfortable and just speaking their language and like embracing it.
Yeah.
That's dope. Yeah. That's pretty cool to know that like that actually exists out there, because third grade, I remember there was a new student that came in. She was from El Salvador, and I was the only student in the class that knew how to speak Spanish. And so what would happen during class was that she'd literally just sit by herself like in a corner while she was doing like her like like on the computer trying to like do assignments, like trying to learn English. And it was kind of weird because like she was trying to learn the material in the classroom, but at the same time she was trying to learn English. So like, how was she able to even understand what was going on in class? So that's pretty cool because it helps be more inclusive. You know, again, what Stacy said. You know, a lot of people. There's more than Spanish out there. So it's nice to know that that's out there.
Yeah, it's a great program. I love it.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to have that introducing kids to it at a young age, because I know you were talking about development earlier and like how those first 5 years or however many years are so important to picking up a language and having it like in you as like you grow up. So I think it's great that they have that. I know they also have one, I know, for Chinese. I've heard of that here in Madison.
Yeah, here in Madison.
So I think that's really interesting too, like that they have these programs for an array of different languages. And it's like, learn English and Spanish, learn English and Chinese. And because it's not something that's like a new concept. Like so many people around the world speak more than one language from an early age. So it's just feel like it's something natural for us to adapt in American culture.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. No
So this is the end of the show. This has been Let's Talk About It. I'm your host, DJ Classic, and my other host, our co-host here is
Latoya Michelle.
Yep. And we just had a conversation about whether immigrant parents should teach their children their native tongues. Thank you for coming out, Stacy and Chris.
Yeah, of course.
It was a great conversation. I feel like we talked about a lot of good things on the show, and I enjoyed it.
Thank you for having us.
Of course, anytime. All right. With that being said, next week I'm not too sure what we will be talking about just yet, but I'm pretty sure it'll be something pretty cool and interesting. So make sure to come back and listen to that show next week at the same time, Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. And until then, have a great week and don't stress out over these classes. I will see you all in the future.
Oh, I hope you run into them, you